where James and the other apostles are debating the high priest in the temple. They ask them to debate, and the last person to speak is James. And at that point, a crazy, violent man comes in and breaks up the debates because James is at the point of winning, according to the Pseudo-Clementine recognitions. These are written in the name of Clement, as I've told you. Clement is a noble from Rome, probably of the Flavian family, who's become interested in these movements. He, according to Pseudo-Clementines, met Peter on the streets of Rome, and he followed Peter back to Palestine for the annual meeting of the church. And he gets back to Palestine, and who does he meet? Who's the leader of the church? Peter? No, James. I don't know about that. How did that happen? Because that's probably what was the real situation. But they're called pseudo by the Orthodox Church because the Orthodox Church doesn't want to admit there could be any truth in them, because they don't go according to the picture of Acts. In fact, they're an anti-Acts, really. In any case, they have survived. And this episode in Book 1 of what's called the two versions, that's why you put it in plural, the homilies and the recognitions. And the recognitions has this scene in the temple of the debates on the temple steps that seems to be reflected in the first 5 books of Acts. Very similar picture to the first 5 books of Acts, very, very parallel. And then, but instead of Stephen being assaulted, and Paul being introduced at the point of Stephen being assaulted, if you know Acts, James is assaulted, and Paul is introduced. So it's an assault on Paul on James, not on Stephen, that occurs in the Pseudo-Clementine recognitions. Oh my God, these people are really nasty. They put their hostility to Paul really deep. You know, Stephen was, this is what happened to Stephen, not James. Well, we'll see if that's true or not later on in the class, and what you finally decide about that particular issue. How authentic you feel the Stephen episode will turn out to be. I think we'll be able to show the Stephen episode is totally artificial. Completely artificial, so that your confidence in the Stephen episode will probably diminish somewhat once we look at it, because no one probably has analyzed it very carefully for you and so forth. So just normally being decent people who accept things at face value, which is what most people would normally do. In any case, this parallel is that we have an attack on James he's standing on the top of the temple steps. And Paul throws him down the temple steps and beats him with one of the pieces of wood that's for the fires in the temple, and leaves him for dead. But he's not dead. His people carry him down to Jericho area. He's only broken his leg. Very interesting bit of detail. And then Paul gets letters from the high priests and pursues the Christian community to Damascus, and comes through Jericho on the way to Damascus, and the community has gone out somewhere outside of Jericho. Noelle's been down there. She can tell you where that might have been. The Qumran community is outside of Jericho, and Noelle and her team were instrumental in finding a mausoleum there, a very interesting kind, on the top of a promontory there. And that was a couple of years ago. It was covered in Time magazine. Ron Dubé, who's lectured in this class, I think, or come in occasionally, got his picture in Time magazine for that, didn't he? Mm-hmm. And a little manipulation by myself, but don't tell the other people about that. But the point is that Qumran is not far from Jericho, and there are sepulchres of this type. The recognition says Paul missed them in Jericho because they went out to the tomb of 2 of the brothers that miraculously whitened of itself every year. Anyway, that's all in the selection I've given you there. You can read that yourself. So there's a parallel of riot here where James is cast down. The question is the dating. This is 60s, that was the 40s. We'll talk about that. I don't necessarily think this is accurate, but what I think has happened here is that 2 assaults on James have been conflated into one. What do you mean conflate? When you, like an accordion, you push 2 things together. There are 2 assaults on James in my view, one in the 40s by Paul, that's been recorded in the Pseudo-Clementine recognitions, where he did not die, but he was left for dead. he only broke one or both his legs, and then the other where he stoned. But that's a Sanhedrin trial. And that probably is not what occurred here, exactly. You say, well, how come you're interested in this? Oh, just because of the big impression James left on subsequent writers. That's what's interesting. But let's go on here. Let's give this portrayal here. We have done badly in letting him speak. Let us cast him down. Oh, they cried, justice has deceived himself. And this fulfilled scripture according to Isaiah 3:10. Let us take away the just one, because he is offensive to us. Wherefore they shall eat the fruit of their doings. That's from the Septuagint version of the Isaiah 3:10. The other version, the Protestant and the Jewish one, is different. But in any case, they think there's a case where James's fate is considered to be foretold by Scripture. And as we already heard, that he is to be, the Scripture declare concerning him. Now we'll find that we have in the Dead Sea Scrolls the death of the righteous teacher too. And certain biblical passages are applied to him. One of the passages that's applied to him is Habakkuk 2 and 3, famous statement from Habakkuk 2:4, the righteous shall live by his faith, is the center of those passages applied to the death of the righteous teacher in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And one of the lines in that really resembles this almost absolutely. So there will be some connections even with the death of the so-called righteous teacher here. So you'll find that in my James the Just and the Habakkuk Passion, where I go through the lines in the Habakkuk commentary from the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are similar to these testimonies here, or similar to the fate of the righteous teacher. Anyway, they cast him down and they began to stone him, and then he kneels on his knees. Father, forgive them, they don't know what they do. And then you begin to see the parallels with the Stephen episode, because this is exactly the way Stephen is portrayed in the Stephen episode. So we're getting elements of overlap between this picture and the Stephen picture in the book of Acts. Now, the first person to discover this was a scholar called Hans Joachim Scheps from Germany. He'd been thrown out of Germany during the Second World War, and he went to Sweden, survived the Holocaust, and he came back. But he is an extremely good scholar, and